am at the Teach Better conference with Megan Balduf. Met her here at the conference and like to just introduce you as a teacher from Virginia. You're a lifelong learner. We've connected here through the Teach Better team. We've also learned that we both like to run, so we went on a run this morning. You have a few kids that are younger than mine, and you come from Virginia. So just to start off with, let's learn about your trench story. So tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
So the one that comes to mind is when I first started at my current school. This was very, very long time ago. It was a new area because my now husband had gotten a job and I needed to move to where he was. So it was a completely different community. And I very quickly was sort of in over my head in a classroom conversation, not for anything bad, but really was with a group of students who were challenging me in a very good way. And it happened to be a day where my brand new administrator wandered into the room,
of course,
and was sitting there.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember being in conversation with students about the book The Little Prince, which we were reading as a companion to Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. And I had a student ask a question, and I looked right at the student, and I looked over his head at my administrator and went, I don't know, but I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
And just that idea of, I'd been a teacher for a few years and had never really felt that flustered, but it was because it was a new situation that I found myself in. And I realized very quickly that I needed to get my feet under me and figure out how I was going to be successful, which I knew I was a successful teacher, but how was I going to be successful in this new space with different expectations? And make that work. And it was a lot of going back to the drawing board on my lesson plan, think, okay, what's working, what's not, what is the expectation here now that I've been in this school and sort of had these moments of panic and pause where things are not going where I want them to go, and how do I make that better?
Yeah, and also when you're not quite sure of how to react, like in that community, like you said, like, I mean, I had an experience when I first started teaching in Colorado, and it's in my upcoming book that would maybe be out around the time this podcast episode comes out. But I was in a very conservative community, and I've lived in Europe and I've lived in Canada, and I was teaching a little bit of French culture, and I got some backlash from the parents. And also, like, a lot of time when parents hear a certain thing and they interpret it a certain way, or the kids kind of construe what really happened in class. But like you said, it's like you didn't really know how to react to a kid's question. And I think even today, like, I've talked to some educators here at the conference, people feel like there's certain things they can't do for fear of getting fired. Even though these probably would be accepted, but just the thinking outside the box things, right? And it's hard to believe that people would still think they would get fired when there's such a shortage of teachers nowadays.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, yeah. So let's talk about your teaching role. So what level and subject area you currently teach?
So I teach middle school English. I teach English 8.
Okay.
I have been teaching this is my 19th year.
Okay.
And of those 19 years, only one was with a different grade level. I did 1 year of English 6 in a 6, 7, 8 middle school. And I said no. They were very lovely, but they were still elementary school students with the more emotional elementary school needs.
Sure.
The very first day of school that year, there were kids who were crying because their parents had left, and kids who needed hugs. And I just thought, this is very odd to me.
Yeah.
This is very strange. And had actually anticipated when I moved to a different location, to a different school system, that maybe I would get a high school job. And I interviewed at a middle school that was just amazing. Every person that I met was somebody I thought I could be friends with you outside of this. And I got an early offer for a job for the upcoming school year. And I, without hesitation, took it. And my fiance, husband now, said, "Are you sure? Didn't you want high school?"
Yeah. Yeah.
I did, but this group, this community, this is
You kinda
where
knew.
I'm going to want to be.
And how long have you been at that job?
I have now been at that job for 17 years.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
But I'm sure staying in that role, in that same grade level, in the same school for so long, you've seen a lot of shifts in the needs of kids.
Absolutely. Yes. I think one of the biggest, when I started teaching, I remember sort of hearing older teachers complain about what students could and couldn't do. They understandably were sort of the first group of students who, at least in my state, had been tested since third grade. So by the time they were getting to middle school, they were expecting the standardized tests, and they were recognizing that, okay, schooling comes with a one right answer, and so there were a lot of concerns about, well, kids don't want to think outside the box, they don't want to take risks, and I realized that wasn't quite true. And while now I'm on the other end of that and I'm the older teacher, I still see those glimmers of, I understand what that concern was and I'm still seeing it, but I know, and now that we've got the research to support the fact that no, kids absolutely can overcome that when the testing is de-emphasized. That has become sort of a cornerstone of, okay, we have this test. I know we have this test, and this test matters, but not as much as the day-to-day stuff. So that's where we're going to put our focus.
Yeah, and I see that like as well, having been a Colorado educator for 20 years, and a lot of the focus was on the test. And at that time, I taught an elective, and if you weren't a core teacher, they didn't really care about like your sub. I mean, because we're only teaching to the test, right? So, I mean, there's a little bit of a shift now, since the pandemic, a little bit more towards the SEL. I'm hoping that it stays kind of out of that, like just teaching to the test, or like how do we, score highest on the standardized scores, because I think more people realize that is just a snapshot of how a kid's doing that day, right?
Right, and that point of how they're doing that day, it's not even what they're doing in the subject, but
emotionally,
the idea that if you've, and we always tell the kids, oh, you have to get a good night's sleep and you have to eat breakfast. But even if they do those things, if they don't like breakfast, if they don't like breakfast, if mom offers Pop-Tarts when you're really hoping for cereal, that becomes part of the issue of why a student may not do as well as they want, or they saw a friend in the hallway and the friend didn't say hi, and all of a sudden they'd had a good night's sleep and they were ready and they'd eaten, and single 5-minute interaction can be what throws them off for the day. And it's interesting to me because as adults, we know that a bad interaction with a coworker or road rage or anything like that is going to throw off our whole day, and why we don't recognize that students experience the same, or what we recognize it, but we don't give it the same credibility that we give to other adults. I think really does a disservice to the kids.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like really putting all this emphasis on a test, and like especially if your school's on turnaround status or kind of in the yellow or orange status, and like you can't, or giving it incentives. It's like, well, yeah, the kid can show up, but they're not necessarily. And some of these test questions, like it's just going to trick people up sometimes too, and they'll just kind of give up. So. Yeah, if we can just stop focusing so much on how your school's going to do, and more like how are your kids going to do, and how are they, getting by day to day, right? So,
and in the real world, they're not going to, as much as any one content area is important. As an adult in my adult life, I have never had to use the physics that I took in high school. I loved it. It was a fun class, but I've never had to use it in real life.
Yeah.
Not in a way that my classroom would have prepared me for. It certainly is a factor when I'm driving, but it's not a conscious factor when I'm driving. And so really preparing kids for the collaboration, the creative thinking, the ability to communicate your ideas effectively. Those are the things that we need to be focusing on versus all the testing.
So I noticed that you have a national board certification. I've talked to a few guests that have that, but they're certified in other areas. So tell me a little bit about the process for language arts teachers.
So I originally certified prior to them changing some of their standards. But I know that some of it still focuses on how you engage students in conversation. And so that was one of the things that I enjoyed most about my certification, was really looking for ways to get the kids engaging authentically in conversations about text. It's not something that is part of my state standards, but it is not a big part of my state standards. And yet it seems to be the piece of sort of English that you find most in the real world, right? Discussing ideas with other people. And that's really what it is. The venue that we use in an English class is the book or the poem or the short story. It's being able to share your ideas, and even like you and I are building on one another. That's a skill that students don't necessarily have. And part of the board certification was filming those kinds of interactions and then reflecting on that. What are you seeing in those conversations? And so I was able to really dig into the way that kids were interacting and realize where my own instructional gaps had created those situations.
And so through that reflection process and the certification process, you really grew in how you...
Oh, absolutely. I tell people that national board certification is as much work as a master's degree. And I have 2 master's degrees on top of it, but I learned more about myself as a teacher doing that certification and the reflection than I did for either of my 2 teacher-based master's degrees.
Yeah, because it's more the practical application in your field, right?
Absolutely. And the required reflection. One of the things that National Board requires is that you identify what a student's doing and what you did for that outcome. So what instruction did you provide? What feedback did you get after the fact? But if you're showing a student product, what was your role as a teacher in that, the creation of that product and the students' understanding of the content? And that is so powerful because teachers don't tend to center themselves. They tend to toot their own horns for things. But the board certification required, a student showed that they understood it. So what did you do to get them there?
Yeah. And that's important to like have you reflect on your own practice certs. These master's programs don't necessarily they give you tools to use, but not in practical life a lot of the time, right?
Or even if it is, here's your master's degree with a certification for reading or for special ed or for whatever, it doesn't have the reflection piece necessarily built in. And that was the strongest part of that national board certification, was how frequently I had to go back and I had to watch video of myself, which if you're not used to doing it, it's a very uncomfortable situation. And not only that, but I had to be able to write very specifically about the video. So I had to be able to say, at minute 4, when I said X. And so you had to watch over and over and over, and digging into your own practice in that way is something most teachers don't do. Even if they do the scant reflection, this is what went well in the lesson. It's rarely with the lens of, this is what I did to facilitate how that went.
Yeah, yeah. Great insight into kind of how that affected your teaching practice. But you also share out as well. We're at the Teach Better conference, and you blog for Teach Better. So, what are some of your blog posts about, and do you have a certain topic you stick with?
So I started blogging for Teach Better during COVID because I was encountering all of these little issues that I thought I can't be the only one experiencing this. And even though I'm not the only one experiencing it, there's probably people who don't have the background in the classroom to have a sense of how do I handle this now. And so it really was for years prior, I had done work with my school's mentoring program. And I thought, even if I am not the smartest person in the room, even if I am not the most experienced person in the room, I have things that I can share. And so it was really most of the blog posts that I started with were addressing these situations that I was seeing in my classroom. I wrote about kids who weren't showing up in the Zoom classrooms and what do you do to handle that? And how do you build community both in the virtual and the physical space? Now my focus, and I do feel a little scatterbrained about it because I don't have a singular focus, but I've been really driven the last few years, partially helped by COVID because of the way we had to change our thinking. But really driven the last few years by how do I make it so that a student's grade in my class really reflects that they've understood the content, and it's not just a collection of points or some game that they've played well.
Yeah. Giving those tools to people as well, and just kind of using the topics that you're experiencing on a day-to-day level help a lot. And I love reading other people's blogs and sharing them, and hopefully that will reach people that are looking for some tools in their classroom. Well, out of everything we've talked about today on the podcast, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
I was going to say, if my audience is primarily teachers, they already know the standardized tests are not. But sometimes I do think it helps teachers to hear that, because you might not be hearing it from your administration, you might not be hearing it from your district, but the test really is a single measure fed in part by is the kid getting tripped up by the question? Is the kid in the right frame of mind to do it that day? That it's not a reflection of you as a teacher or even the student's abilities as a student with your content. It's a single moment in time. And if you treat it that way, if you treat it like this is actually less than a quiz or an assessment in my classroom, because you don't write the state standardized tests, you don't get a chance to see the questions a lot of times, you have no impact on how they might change. If we focus on that day-to-day instruction and making sure that students understand what's happening for your content in your classroom, then the research shows that the standardized test score follows that. That if you're focused on not test prep or how to gain the questions, but really just focused on, do you know the content and know it in a way that is not reflected on a multiple choice test, really getting the kids to sort of dig into those upper levels of Bloom's taxonomy or something like that, where they're creating and they're explaining and they're synthesizing. And if that's what you can get students to for your content area, then you'll have given them the knowledge they need for the multiple choice standardized test question.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, approach it in a way where we're helping them have those tools to better understand the test material, but higher level thinking skills, right? Where can people connect with you and find you online?
So I am on Twitter, and that's pretty much it. Other social media that I have is private and limited to family, because my family is spread across the country. But Twitter is where I am a fairly active educator.
And that handle is
At M Balduf.
Great. Well, I will wish you a great rest of the conference here at the Teach Better Conference. And it was great meeting you. And I'm glad I got to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, it was such fun meeting you too. Thank you so much.
Hey.
I love that you still